Democrats and Republicans alike are surveying the political landscape to see who might vie for the Oval Office in 2020. As of last week, we know one person who will not, former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. What are some of the things that would-be candidates consider? Here's what political consultant Anthony Cignoli thinks.
It is difficult in this day and age because you've got to combine the old school that still works and is imperative and important in places like New Hampshire and Iowa and Ohio with the new age, which goes well beyond preparing your voter ID and your get out to vote. It's data mining. It's knowing exactly where to go to get that base. It's launching your candidate in such a way that you're quiet at first, taking a look at the rest of the field and seeing how you're going to place. And the worst part of what we do now is looking at the other potential candidates, polling early to see who might hurt our candidate the most. And the terrible part of it that I just referred to is working on tearing down the favorability of the other candidates. Something I abhor. There's a lot of us in the field now that don't like doing that, and we're wondering if there will be a change given 2016 and what happened and campaigns that brought us even closer to that. A lot of people are tired of this stuff and won't run if that's what it requires them to do, but that's a big part of the game today.
And to what your point you just said, that tearing down of the candidates hugely factored into former Governor Deval Patrick's decision, right?
Absolutely.
He wasn't ever in, but now he said, for sure, no 2020 for me. Thank you very much. So what do you think that he looked at that he disliked and was like, no, thank you?
So much exactly that. He's in a comfortable life now. He thinks about his wife, his family, and he went through a lot as governor. And certainly it's not a great secret that it had a negative impact on his wife personally, that it was a lot for her to deal with, especially the first year of the governorship and all. So I think, unlike so many who say, geez, because of my family, I'm not running, or, I want to spend more time with my family, this was real with Deval Patrick. He knows something else that we all do now, too, not just the teardown, but the defense that we go into to protect us from the teardown. In my office, we call it Iron Dome, like the Israeli block that stops missiles from coming in. We're all over the internet, constantly watching for those incoming attacks, how to stop them, how to block them. And I think he and his team started taking a look at the initial reactions that were coming. Positive and strong from base and where he would need to build. Positive and strong from a lot of the Obama people. It's a heady thing to have people like Axelrod and Valerie Jarrett on your side promoting you.
Whispering to you, please come and do this.
Absolutely whispering and telling other people, watch Deval, wait till we see a poll or two. But even with that in hand, I think he started to think about, who needs this craziness? He can perhaps be more a kingmaker or a queenmaker and have as much weight or power as he might like to.
But do you think that he was hearing from the David Axelrods, the Valerie Jarretts, this thing with your family might be something you could use? Talk about mental health. Talk about the importance of, talking about mental health. Could they have spun that in a way that could have been a platform that he could use to his advantage?
Greatly so, because so many people are affected by these issues, certainly. Everyone has in their family someone they're close to who's been affected in this way. The same way with opioids and other issues like that. There's a commonality. But I think also that Governor Patrick could have used this in another way as well. And that was just that concept of where do we find the good candidates, Republican or Democrat, who are able to do the job, who want to step up, but don't want to go through the horrific rigors that are there on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, and even more so in the new Trumpian age.
What impact do you think that the tenor that we're talking about is going to have on would-be candidates, either Republican or Democrat?
It really gives cause to pause to people like Joe Biden who want it, and he is kind of running right now. We talked to some of his folks, and it's obvious Deval's exit, he thinks, is helpful to him because of some of the players that it frees up that he might be able to bring back on. But there's someone who's been through it now several times, in tough Senate campaigns and a tough campaign himself for the presidency before becoming vice president. And you weigh that and you think, wait a second, life is good, I've got grandkids. Do I really want to do this, or am I concerned enough about America that perhaps I step back, and just take part in a campaign, that I endorse actively, that I work actively for someone? And you see a lot of that going on right now, even right now with Governor Patrick. Others calling on him, talking to him. He is a player. He can raise some money. He can move some folks. And does that then elevate him down the road? Is he a vice presidential candidate by doing what he just did? Or is he a cabinet member in somebody's cabinet if he picks the right horse?
Right. And to your point about the money, the Reason to Believe PAC, that wasn't necessarily his PAC, but his people were behind it, raised, according to the latest FEC filings, about $700,000. Seems like a big number. In politics, not such a big number. Was that disappointing for his folks?
I don't think it was so much disappointing. I think to raise more, he had to be more definitive. He had to himself be picking up the telephone. And what we were hearing was he was leaving that to others, obviously, because this was a PAC separate from he himself. I think when the flesh and blood candidate says, I'm in, I'm running, it's all in, and he or she is on the telephone making the phone calls, it's different. The big checks get written that way. You know, that's how it works. Here, I won't say that he was handicapped, but this really was the outside group doing this. It wasn't Deval himself saying, let's go, I need the cash, come on, as he did when he ran for governor in Massachusetts.
Yeah. We've talked about some of the Democratic contenders. Let's look at the Republican potential contenders. UMass did a poll in the beginning of November. They did the polling. They looked at the Republican primary ticket, 6 possibilities they floated to folks. And this would be in the case that President Trump would not be seeking a second term. So we had 22% undecided, not, unexpected this far out. 33% for Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, 26% for Vice President Mike Pence, 8% for former Governor Mitt Romney, but only 6 folks that are being polled at this point. Is that because of the will he, won't he of President Trump?
A little bit of that, but also, too, as players really dig into who's out there making noise, who's really interested, like Mitt Romney, who's just entering into the United States Senate in January of next year, not even there yet. You know, who's real, who's not. That's what you have to weigh out as you start to poll. But Baker is extremely interesting to a lot of us here because he'll say, no, not interested. But we all know how things change when the numbers are there and possibly when money is there as well, too. Some of this is because players are not sure if President Trump will be there, if he'll be able to answer the bell at the time of this election. And they take a look, too, at the other side. Who's it going to be? Am I going to be up against Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren or possibly the return of Hillary Clinton if somehow, some way, the president fails, falls, gets impeached, isn't there to answer the bell, and you're running against, she can make a case, as wild as it may sound, is that I was the duly elected president of the United States. And there are a lot of people who will say Hillary fatigue and all the rest, but I could see her people starting to move this and massage it, and they are, even as we're sitting here right now. They're putting the feelers out. How does this work? She was denied. Could she come back? Does she commit to running, winning, staying there for one term, as Biden might do? There's a million machinations in play right now, and we're hearing all this buzz everywhere. But more interesting to me is to see who is sending people already to New Hampshire, to Iowa. There's folks on the ground already. It's amazing.
Looking at spaces, looking for staffers. What's going on?
Where do we go? How do we make lunch? What event do we come to? What do we tie into where we're going to get some national media and get the buzz started for free, the earned media piece, very much as Barack Obama did in 2007 by just showing up in New Hampshire, packing a hall. If I remember, the place held a few hundred people. There were 1,500 people in line. I remember calling a political consultant who asked me to go up and go check this guy out. What's happening? And calling him and say, you're not going to believe it. It's snowing. There's ice on the ground. And this guy, who's a first-term United States Senator, is here in New Hampshire, and the place is packed. Something's different. And that's when we started to look at that and say, wow, what's up? And that's what can help launch a presidential.
Of who's heading to New Hampshire, or who you've seen, heard, observed for yourself, any names you can drop for us?
Sure. Biden's got people kicking around up there already. Always there's a hand that's kept in this by some players. We're seeing that Senator Warner has been up and is kicking around looking for venues. I think he's got a few things on the books to speak. Kamala Harris, I know a lot of people think, wow,
California.
Yes, and yet she's got a couple of pals and friends who are looking at, how does this work? That's the other piece of this. Those of us who have been up there are getting asked, gosh, not on the clock yet, but geez, how does this work? What do you do? How does this work? And that's why so many players were in New Hampshire recently over the Secretary of State battle. Who was going to remain? Is it the person who's been there that keeps us the first in the nation, or is it his challenger? And as we know, things will continue as they always have. But that was a big deal because that would change how the game works. Is New Hampshire the focus? Is it not?
Overseer of elections, big position there, even though it doesn't get a whole lot of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.